Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next interview is with Ariella, Pahlke, and Nance, Ackerman, and we talk about their important new film, Conviction, a feature documentary film that envisions alternatives to prison through the eyes of women behind bars. Right from the website, that's convictiondocumentary.com. The film was playing at Hot Docs this year, 2019, and check it out. Stay tuned online. I'm sure that you can follow them on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and find out when the film will be released. I'm sure it's going to be doing a little bit of a festival tour. You're going to find out why, who makes up the fastest growing population in the world in prisons. We talk about vulnerable and marginalized people that are in prison, and we talk about responsibility and this fascinating thing about art for change, art for healing, and how film and photography and a variety of approaches to art actually can have an impact in people's lives. We talk about active listening and communication and why prisons are actually a really bad or poor investment of money. And we talk about a real allocation of resources and why prisons really aren't healing environments. That's not what they're built for, in a sense. And we get into things around PTSD and trauma, childhood trauma in particular, and how do we really prevent recidivism. And this is a film that you really want to see. It's about responsibility. It's about impact. It's about it's kind of an indictment of society too, in many respects. So check it out, convictiondocumentary.com, and don't forget davidpecklive.com as well. Check that website out for more information about my podcasting and my public speaking. I'd love for you to order a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called Real Change is Incremental. I'm hoping to get back to writing something again very soon, hopefully before 2021. I just put that on the air here now. That's recorded for all to hear for in perpetuity. So there you go. I've just made some sort of informal/formal commitment to publishing my next book before 2021. And don't forget to face2facelive.ca for more interviews. We've got close to 450 there and growing all the time. Loving every minute of it. If you can support the work we're doing financially, $1 a month, $5 a month, boy, would I appreciate it. You can do that through patreon.com if you believe in what we're doing here. And if you can't do that, and I totally understand if you can't, if you could leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify, or share the podcast with your friends, or sign up for our email newsletter, or maybe even advertise on Face to Face, we'd certainly appreciate it. That's another way you can support the work we're doing here too. And I appear on rabble.ca, another platform, a news agency here in Canada. Rabble.ca, bloggers, podcasters, journalists, people you're going to want to hear, voices you're going to want to listen to about issues, news for the rest of us. That's rabble.ca. And coming right up, a fascinating conversation about a brilliant new film with Ariella, Pahlke, and Nance, Ackerman, their new film, Conviction. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by two very special guests here with me today. Direct from the East Coast, I guess we can say, here in Toronto at Hot Docs to talk to Face to Face about their new film, Conviction. We have Ariella, Pahlke, and Nance Ackerman here live, not in the studio, but in a studio. Thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So fresh off 3 screenings at Hot Docs, why don't we step right into the film and the context and the conversation? I guess you could say. Tell us a little bit about the screenings. How's the film been received, and maybe you can kind of wrap that into a little bit of context for our listeners about what this film Conviction is really all about.
Nance, you want me to go?
Yeah. Off you go.
The screenings were great, pretty packed. We had a lot of interest in aspects of the film that relate to how we made it. We had guests there, three guests from the film. Senator Kate was there for the first two screenings, and so was Bianca Mercer, one of the women in the film.
Right.
And the architect in the film, Anne Sinclair, was also there for two of the screenings. So it was really, really great to have them. And we felt, I think, that we had great feedback, and from a variety of different people, filmmakers, audience people who work with nonprofits, teachers. So a lot of different kinds of feedback, but it was very positive. And the Q&As, I think, impressed me because they were substantial. So the questions were really about the issues and about how people could be involved, about how we made the film. Also,
I think the biggest feedback we got was that it was really powerful and people were truly affected. Like there was a lot of emotion and crying and feeling pretty devastated by the film, which we were hoping that it would do that, but it would also leave people feeling a little bit of hope and a little bit of desire to do something for change. So all around, we were really happy. And what was wonderful is that we did have one of the ex-prisoners from the film, probably, who had the biggest role in the film. She was there speaking, and she was just captivating, as well as the senator, who was unbelievable as well. It was great.
So it seems, and by the way, congratulations on the film. I mean, it's engaging. It's interesting. I mean, I don't. It's one of those films that pulls you in from the get-go, and you can't. I can't help but empathize with the characters and see friends and see family, see myself, and wonder, and kind of wonder what is next. You say in the film right out of the gate that shortly after those yoga-like establishing shots, which is kind of, and I think you bookend the film with that shot, don't you? I think you do.
Yeah.
Women are the fastest growing population in prisons in the world. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? And is that what drew you into this, or was it even more personal than that?
Yeah, I mean, they are the fastest growing prison population in the world. I think that was a statistic that we sort of found all at the same time. Our other co-director, Teresa McGinnis, and Ariella and I got together and wanted to make a film. I think Ariella can talk more about her sort of philosophy around punishment. She was pretty digging into those issues, and both Teresa and I had met Kim Pate before and were very impressed with her work. So the genesis of this film kind of came through all of us coming together and wanting to make a film together, but and each of us coming at the issue. I came at it from a very, I'd met Ashley Smith's family, the girl that had killed herself in prison as the guards had watched when she was 18 years old, and I had come at it from a very sort of emotional and a connection with Kim. Teresa's past work. I mean, she did Buying Sex, another film that was at Hot Docs. So she's dealt with a lot of criminalized women in her films. And Ariella, you can talk about your thoughts on punishment.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I was really. I think that statistic made us all wonder why, which we do state at the beginning of the film. And I think that we all had some sense that. More and more vulnerable and marginalized people are ending up in prison. And so the idea of what prison is and what prison does has always kind of interested me, and I've always found it problematic. So is it about punishment, or is it about rehabilitation, and how can something be both? And why do people act out in bad ways? Why do people act out violently? We all kind of have some sense of that most people in prison have had very traumatic experiences in their childhood. But how does that cycle work? Why do the same people keep ending up in prison? And I think we all had the feeling that it's not working. We wanted to understand why, and we really wanted to understand that, to explore that question from the perspective of people who are in prison in a creative way. I've done a lot of work that's sort of collaborative documentary work where I've used art to have people who are participants in the film express themselves in ways that often ends up being, really empowering and gives them a sense of also being a creator in the film, or have a sense of authorship about how people want to tell their stories. And
what's so
creative. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say what's so amazing to me about how you pieced this together, and help me out here, and maybe this is why three directors, but 3 directors, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would almost say maybe more, in the sense that you've got these other artists that you're telling these stories within stories. And I guess all of us are like that. We're all very complicated and nuanced, and we have our own idiosyncrasies and so on. But you actually have, artists, photographers, poets, visual artists, filmmakers within the film that you're following, like these individual diaries, and yet they're all linked in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and we really, when we first started working with the women, we went into the provincial prison in Burnside, and we did a presentation for 11 women, and those were all the women. There was only 25% of the women. There were 40 women, 42 women in the prison at the time, and those were the only women that were not on remand, which means the only women that had already been sentenced. Everybody else was just waiting there to be sentenced, so they weren't allowed to take part in the program that we were offering, which was a creative program. And the women came, from the start. We did a presentation, and we said to them that we wanted them to be the ones to decide which aspects of their lives they would want to show and how they would want to show that. And that's how we continued to work with them throughout the past 4 years, even during the edit. So that was always a sense that we really wanted them to be able to control and direct, and we gave them cameras. They can frame, they can show and not show what they feel comfortable with. And that process was an ongoing negotiation. So often, sometimes they had given us some footage that they had taken, we put it into the film. And then when we watched it together, through a lot of back and forth dialogue, they ended up saying, no, in fact, it's not something that they want to go out to the public.
Right.
So, and that was very much part of what we wanted to do to respect the way that we worked with them. We didn't want to do interviews and ask questions about their lives. We really wanted them to figure out a way to decide what they wanted to share and how they wanted to share it.
Is there a sense in which you were trying, I would imagine, as filmmakers, as storytellers, you were, intentionally working on a variety of levels, but also sort of, tacitly working on other levels too. And I wonder to what degree you might have been addressing that, almost that need for affirmation, that need for access, that need for, I think one of the young women says at one point, when Senator Pate says, how would you spend $100,000, or what would you do differently? And I think one of the women said, well, I just needed somebody to listen. And when you hear it put that way, I mean, you guys were giving these young women an opportunity that they clearly weren't getting elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of directors and filmmakers and musicians and radio, documentarians that have gone into marginalized communities. It's not a new thing, in my work. I was a photojournalist for years, and we did photo voice all the time. It's film and photography and art and music, all are, obviously, we all know, they give people a voice. The women that open and close the film, or they don't give them their voice, they allow their voice to be heard.
To be heard, sure.
They already
have a voice, yeah.
Yeah. But the beginning and end of the film is in Nova, is in the federal women's prison, where we didn't have anywhere near the access, but we were allowed in to work on this musical project with them. And many of them had said it's the first time they'd ever heard their own voice singing. And all the words that you hear throughout the film come from their spoken word and their poetry and their rapping. And the More Than a Number song at the end is all written by them. So they all found their voices too, along with our main participants, our main collaborators. So it was sort of all through the film. Yeah, and I mean, Bianca, the one that came to the screening, I mean, she, throughout for the last 2.5 years, she's been calling us her film crew. She'll be like, let my film crew through here, let my film. So, there is definitely fuzzy lines in terms of who's directing who.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that some of the women also, they had, I was amazed by how creative and how insightful they were immediately, when we first started, about what they wanted, how they wanted to express themselves, the kinds of photographs, the kinds of writing, what they did with their voices. And I think that they had that additional sense that I think being in prison even more, you can't talk to people in the outside world, you don't have access to the internet. So through the film, I think it was also a way for them to be able to reach out and communicate with the world, with the viewers, with the audience, not just with us. And it's not just about, okay, like you've never, used your voice in this way before, but they were very clear that they wanted to share what they felt should change with other people.
What do you say to sort of, I don't know if these folks would be called critics, but at some point in the film, and it might have been the senator who said, many of these women don't deserve to be there. And I wonder how far you could sort of extend that, when you've made this film about alternatives and art as therapy, I suppose, and different approaches to corrections. I also, by the way, we need to talk about this a little bit, but that prisons weren't meant to be treatment centers and shelters, and yet that's the way they're being used. I mean, there's some really important messages here that need to get out that clearly you guys think are worth talking about. Can you talk about any of those things at all? And I want to link it to the critic who might say, well, yeah, but what's the line? You do the time, you do the crime, you do the time.
Yeah, well, Kim mentions that in one scene that she grew up. When she grew up, she wanted to be a lawyer. She wanted to make money. She came from a working class family, and she had that very perspective. This is Senator Kim Pate. That people deserve what they get. You do the crime, you do the time. That exact line. She says that in the film, and she talks about it. And it's, I think it's one of the most meaningful kind of statements that really addresses what you're asking, because she talks about how that changed for her when she realized who was in prison and why, and how it was, so many of the most vulnerable people in society who have had really traumatic experiences. And, there's a fine line, like you can be black and white about it. You can say, well, are they just, victims, or are they perpetrators? Like, people will argue in that way, and it's really not that black and white. And She does explain it when she says it's not about excusing. Some people might have committed acts of violence or really done problematic things, and it's not about excusing it, but it's about understanding it and about society's response to it that is actually a response that would work, instead of the response that we have right now, which is the prisons, which through the film we really want to show that it's not working, because people are leaving and coming back in and leaving and coming back in. So it's much less a film about the prison. It's more about society. Like, what can we do to have a much better support for people who are in, like anyone who's in a film, and anybody who's in prison who's like the women in our film.
Yeah, I think you have to understand too that it's not just activists and bleeding heart filmmakers like ourselves that think like this. I mean, the head of corrections, it was like a decade ago that all the corrections got together, the heads of corrections got together and said that 75% of the women in prison could be released right then and there with absolutely no increased danger to society.
Wow.
They know that. We had a meeting with the head of the provincial corrections, and I looked at him and I said, so do you punish your kids? And he said, well, I've tried a couple times, by taking away screen time or by whatever and taking things away from them. And I said, well, how does that work for you? And he said, it doesn't work. They know that punishment as a response to vulnerable people's reactions to their own trauma is not working. So it's just a message that needs to kind of seep into our psyche.
I'd love to go deeper, and I hope we can, on the trauma and the PTSD-like nature of this conversation connected to mental health issues and so on. But am I ready for that? As a community member, is my family ready for that? Is the mayor of my town open to that kind of an approach? These, again, I think it might have been Senator Pate's language, but these non-prison-like responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Well,
but I think we are ready for that. Sorry, Ariella, but I think we are ready for it because, just even the people that you wouldn't think would be ready, that are just about money and just about they gauge progress in a community with how big the condos are. But if you actually gauge it with, say, let's just take away that whole thing we just talked about treating all the most vulnerable. Take that away and just talk about money. Is a colossally bad investment of our tax dollars. It is a really bad investment. Just talk money. It averages every time we talk to people, and we put in $100,000 as an average between federal and provincial, because federal is generally quite a bit more for women. $100,000, and we just showed it to a garden. She said actually it's like $140,000. It keeps going up and up.
That's per year.
$140,000 to put a woman in prison. What could you do? It's all about reallocating funds. It's not that the funds aren't there. It's that they have to be allocated to the place where they're going to work.
Is it just too hard? Is that kind of what I'm hearing? Do you think? Is this just an easier solution for the time being?
I think that
it's a tough question, I know.
Yeah, people end up, people end up putting, wanting to protect themselves from the things that they don't like and that they're afraid of, right? So it's a protectionist move, apparently about public safety. But what's misguided about that is that almost everybody who goes to prison comes back out, and they come back out and they're worse. They're worse off because of the way that they've been treated and that they haven't been given the proper support. And it's not a great environment. It's not a great healing environment.
Right.
So for society to think that, we're going to deal with, even if it's just about our safety, that we're going to be safer if we put all these people behind bars, that's not actually true either.
I think, David, it's you have to look at it like I always compare it to, who'd have thunk it 25 years ago when you're flying in a plane filled with smoke that you could have actually banned smoking in all public places. Right. And it's not that it can't happen. You just have to hit people's pocketbooks. You have to let them know how much money they're losing and how much their community is suffering. And also, I think in our just to bring it back to the film, the reason we chose to really focus in on for key people and to really follow them and experience through their eyes what they go through when they leave, is a way to actually just humanize. What are we doing to our fellow members of society by doing this? And those were many of the comments that we heard after the screenings. People just felt so connected with these women. And, I think that what I was saying before, we put people away behind bars because we don't want to see them. We don't want to have to deal with them. We don't want to feel that connection. And yet in this film, we were trying to do the opposite. We were really trying to establish that connection between, who's us, who's them. I think what's that last line in the rap, beyond the fence, we see common ground. That was one of the lines from the women. They're just craving that connection too. They don't, everybody, they want to have this dialogue with society as well. And that's why they're in the film. And that's why they're sharing very, very intimate aspects of their lives.
Wasn't there's an opening.
I think
opening piece of
Go
poetry
ahead.
opening piece of poetry at the beginning of the film, release me from my, I wrote it down, release me from my shackles and let me prove my worth. And I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that what we all want to do? Isn't that what we're all trying to do in whatever way we can, whether it's through the job we have or the
Yeah.
people we meet and so on? And there's something really, I mean, this is what I love about filmmakers and about great film and docs in particular, that provides this opportunity to empathize with others in a way that you just can't find anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing is, we're all trying to prove our worth, like you say. All of us are doing that, and we all fail,
Yes.
in big ways. But when they fail, it's just the response is so violent and so damaging. That's the problem. They get thrown right back into prison. So, and it's just as Senator Pate says all the time, it's just a circumstance that we've all had, what's her whole thing is that crime is a theory. We all have, I'm sure, broken the law in certain points in our life. And it's just because we didn't get caught. We're in a stratus of society where it's acceptable, and they're not. And that's the problem.
Can either of you talk about what is an abolitionist's perspective on this? Is it what I think it is?
Yes, it's that, prisons should be shut down. People should be released from prison, and then the prisons shouldn't exist. Yes. Is that
yeah,
what you think?
No, that's a pretty black and white answer, right? I mean, that's what.
But it's not like. But that's the problem. That's what they did in P4W. They just shut her down, but they didn't know how to do anything else.
Right.
And that's what happened is that they thought they could make the creating choices and the little cottages and everything work. But one little thing went wrong. Somebody broke a rule, and bam, they go back to what they know. And they put up the barbed wire, and they put up the fences, and they put up the cameras. And the problem is that it has to be a kind of a movement where we have the services in the community to deal with the mental health issues, the PTSD, the childhood and sexual physical abuse that these people have experienced, that is dealt with. Basically get back to minimum livable wage and income, where people can actually avoid poverty and avoid the things that lead them to these situations and this trauma. So it's going to be a gradual thing, and the prisons will just close naturally. If you can prevent the recidivism, then they will close naturally. It's not like you walk up, close the door right now, because they don't know anything else. They're not, as you see in the film, the services aren't there in the community. They're there for a very few and lucky women that have advocates that can help them get to the appointments, or that have other supports, or have, maybe a parent that can come and drive them somewhere. But they're not there for the real struggle, the struggling women who can't access it.
Yeah, it makes. By the way, earlier on when you were quoting the lyrics from that song at the end of the film, "Common Ground," I thought that could have been a great title for the film as well, because it kind of, it's got that I'm connected to you and you're connected to me kind of feel to it. Because really, there is a sense in which you and I guess it is Senator Pater right that we've all kind of. I mean, there but for the grace of God go we, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
maybe we'll name the screening tour. Maybe we'll name our screening tour that we're going to head off on. We'll call it the Common Ground.
The Common Ground tour. I like it.
Thanks, David.
So tell me a little bit about From the Ground Up. Is that okay? Can we talk about that for those who haven't seen the film? Because I think it's a really fascinating notion. Yeah. And you just made a reference to as well. Actually, now I'm not sure who it was, but to creating choices. Maybe you can kind of connect it to that sort of approach. I was going to say experiment, but that's not fair. That approach to trying to attend.
Don't give me too much, Ariella.
Yeah.
Don't give. Okay. So I mean, I just want to say that the From the Ground Up, that the women, like the women themselves, after we were with them for, I don't know, a year plus, and they kept coming back in, and then they would talk about why they ended up back in and what they needed on the outside, what they didn't have.
Right.
So that was the main question of the film, like, what would you have needed to not end up here? And so through their discussions about what was missing for them when they left, they started to brainstorm, and it came very organically. They started to brainstorm, well, what would they need? What kind of a place would they need? Why aren't the existing, anything that exists is not working for them? And so they came up with this idea for sort of like it's like a housing commune, I guess, in nature, where people would work and live and have support and support each other, called From the Ground Up. So that came, and then we ended up also bringing them together with architects, which they wanted to meet with some architects. And so we organized that for them. And I don't know how much, we shouldn't say, like when you said, don't say too much, Nance, like not to say where it ended up, or, I mean,
well, I think you can go back to the other plans. It's a cyclical thing in corrections and justice in this country. So the two plans that Kim outlines in the film that she said that this sounded very much like, I mean, when were they proposed? Ariella, what, 30?
Creating Choices was the national, that was the bigger, well-known plan that was
1990, right?
Created 30 years ago. And that was a massive project to, everybody with government, people in prisons, women's side, nonprofit organizations, people came together to create this huge plan. And that was ended up what shut down P4W and ended up being the creation of these other 5 other women's prisons across the country, which were never intended to be as prison-like, as Kim says. They were supposed to be a radical alternative, and this was seen internationally as like a groundbreaking, innovative approach and alternative. And from, the Kim Pate's perspective and some of the other people's perspective, even people who work in the prisons, but it's not worked out the way it was supposed to. Because they are like prisons, and now we have more and more women in these prisons than ever were at P4W. So by making something better, it ended up just increasing the numbers of women in prison.
Yeah, P4W is a prison for women in Kingston that was shut down in the 90s.
Sadly, we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes, but I did want to talk a little bit about it comes up in the film, mental health issues, trauma, like related issues, and so on, and then even PTSD at one point, and I wonder and happy for you to go either of you anywhere with this, but is there a sense in which if we could get to some of these people, I was going to say women in this case, but people sooner, I'm including myself in that, by the way, that we could mitigate some of these problems, these potential risks? I mean, in a sense, I guess that's a really simple question to answer, but I think there's a level of complexity to it when you bring in political voice and profit and ideology and all those things. But I'm wondering if you could, if you could sort of talk to that mental health component, even for a couple of minutes. Yeah, can you just well, you know what, actually, how about 32 and a half seconds? You've got 32 and a half seconds just to wrap it all up. Yeah, I'm kidding. Take your time. You can take more than a couple minutes.
Funny, when you said, can we get to it sooner? Like the first thing that came to my mind was in terms of sooner in people's lives, earlier in people's lives. And all the women who we ended up talking to in the film, everything that kind of traumatized them started in childhood and often through families or lack of family support. So yes, absolutely. Sooner, earlier supports that are there for families or for people who don't have families, I think would definitely be something that would be helpful. Yeah, it's poverty. It's
really, it all just comes down to that, I think.
So tell me a little bit more about how you think about poverty. Poverty is a pretty layered thing.
Yeah, I mean, in the film, it starts out. You can hear Bianca saying that you can't buy love in rehab. You can't get it from a therapist. You can't get it at a detox center. It's poverty in Nova Scotia. We have all kinds of poverty. You have economic poverty. You have poverty of location, of when you live in a remote area, 2 hours away from a hospital. Takes you months and months and months to get any kind of specialist to look at you. There is a real crisis, and it really comes down to access, and it comes down to the haves and have-nots, and how we treat them.
There's a set. I can't help but be struck by the sense of, and again, I think this is that empathetic lens that you guys bring to it as storytellers and filmmakers, and in this case, a very empathetic opportunity for us as viewers to step into this story. There's a family dynamic there, and every now and then you kind of shock me out of the film by the little bits of business that remind me that this must have been a pretty moving experience for you guys as well. Can you, as we wrap up, can you talk to me a little bit about that? I would imagine you're still probably in touch. I think one of you had already mentioned that earlier on. Can you talk about that family that developed that? And interestingly too, help me out here, but I think somebody early on in the film said, maybe it was mom saying something about her daughter. I can't remember which daughter, but that this is where I feel most secure. This is it's in prison where I feel the safest.
Yeah, because they do say that, and it's one of the tensions in the film is that we're not trying to say that prison's great because people feel there at all. In fact, it's the reverse. Yep. It's an indictment on our society to say that there's so little support in society that people end up having to go to prison because it's like the only social service that doesn't turn people away and that can't turn people away. So that's kind of, used in that way. And I think in terms of when you were talking about the sense of family, were you asking about how we feel together with the women or how we've affected them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I see that beautiful, by the way, a little shout out here for folks at Conviction, and that's how it's spelled, convictiondocumentary.com. But there's the lovely photo of you, I believe, on the creators link. And that's maybe not the whole team, but it sure, to me, certainly captures a dynamic that looks like a pretty close-knit group.
I guess because we entered the project and with our very first meetings there as not sort of presenting ourselves as people and what we're interested in. We were totally upfront about what we wanted to do and why we wanted to make this. And, I think we shared quite a bit of ourselves. We always participated in the activities when we could. We shared any piece of equipment that we had. We were encouraging the women to try and to use all the cameras, all the mics. Like one woman was interested in learning more about sound. So, she would often work with me. So I think that it's about, and you were talking about relationships at the beginning of the podcast. I think it really is the film, it comes through in the film. It's about the relationships, and we didn't want to have a conventional, interviewer subject relationship.
Right.
We really wanted to, I think we learned a lot. They learned a lot. We're still very much in touch with the women. We feel like, I think I can say that they're part of our lives and we're a part of their lives. And that's not always uncomplicated. I mean, there's lots of negotiations there to try to, I guess, we're asking society to take a risk and to open up to people that some people in society might not feel very welcoming to or very open to. And so I think we're trying to do that in the way that we've made the film, and we hope that comes through in the film.
Well, I would say it does, and this whole notion of and if you'd like to just comment on this, but this notion of investing in people and not prisons, in communities and not in incarceration, for me is certainly not only a thread, but a message. I think that's the call to action. It seems to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because within each of these institutions, there are many people who do care deeply about the women inside,
right,
and who actually feel that they could be much more helpful,
right,
if it wasn't in a prison context. And the guard, Tanya, who's one of the key participants in the film, she comes out and says that, and she doesn't work there anymore. So now she works in the community.
Yeah, I think it's a reallocation of not just money. It's not just a reallocation of money. It's a reallocation of responsibility. We're responsible for reacting differently, as a society. Reacting with love.
I don't think I couldn't come up with a better place to end the interview. A reallocation of responsibility and ending on love. I mean, that's a pretty good place to end. Listen, by now they're going to call us all bleeding heart liberals. You know that, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's so good. Listen,
I'm used to being called names.
That's right. Yeah, bring it on. Bring it on. What a pleasure chatting with you both today. We've been talking with Ariella, Pahlke, and Nance Ackerman about their new film Conviction. Hey, just before we go, what's next for the film? Can you talk to us a little bit about that, or is it just stay tuned to social media and to the website for the time being?
We're submitting it to other festivals around the world. We're going to have an impact campaign where we're partnering with groups and the Elizabeth Fry Society across the country to have screening events, and we really want people to use the film as a tool. There's been many universities and schools who have been interested already in having us participate in panels, events, having the film, and it's going to be broadcast on the documentary channel in the fall. Yeah, and also we're going into the prison that it was shot in, the provincial prison, to show it to everyone there. So we're having, and on this day we're hoping to have screenings across the country in prisons if we can get that organized. So
I think maybe you should be working on a petition as well. It's maybe you're already thinking about that in the impact campaign, but yeah. Give people give us something to do when.
Yeah, we're exactly. So we're going to be like we're on all the social media platforms too, at Conviction Documentary and at Conviction Doc. So
great.
That's a great idea.
Well, listen, thanks
so much.
Thanks again for your time today. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.